We wanted to create a brand that would live past myself. The idea was to create something that was lasting and that could travel across platforms and mediums. PewDiePie, as rich as he is, if he were a traditional broadcaster, he'd be like 1,000 times as rich. There's no reason to give money to influencers because you're just not going to make as much money back than if you just give it directly to Facebook and Google. The idea that even someone like Anderson Cooper is any more talented or works harder than PewDiePie, I'm sorry, it's a fantasy. For every step forward, we would take 4 steps back. I was running out of ideas. I had said I could no longer learn fast enough. The smart thing to do as a creator is to be authentic. You got to treat your audience, no matter if it's 10 people, no matter if it's 10 million people, treat them like people, not like numbers, not like data.
Hey, welcome to the Create Unknown, the home of Make Something Mean Something. It is TCU's Day. We are here live on Discord every single Tuesday. So if you're like, what do I do on Tuesdays? Come join the Discord. Become a patron. You can chat in the episode chat. Hang out with us. We are always here. We cannot leave. We are chained to doing this every Tuesday. I'm Kevin Lieber, and with me, as always, is Matthew Tabor.
Not only are we chained into doing it every single Tuesday, we know in advance what's coming. It's this grim reminder that next Tuesday you're going to be locked down talking to this specific person. But no, we have a couple. Well, first off, we have somebody today who we wanted to talk to for a long time, a couple years now. But we also have 2 or 3 guests booked out, don't we? Who do we have coming up?
Well, next week we have Barely Sociable. And The following week we have CoffeeZilla, who's actually a return guest. Doing content differently, though. Yeah, it's like metaverse.
Is he a new guest?
Alternate universe, coffee break, CoffeeZilla.
Is it like when a wrestler gets a new character? You know, is that what's happening? Like, are they considered a return character when they have a new wrestling identity?
No, they're just a totally new gimmick. So yeah.
Then CoffeeZilla for the very first time on this podcast.
That's right. Brand new gimmick. And then after that, we have another returning guest, Sean Malone, who's been doing great stuff on the Fee channel Without a Frame, hitting some pop culture stuff, which, you know, we love to think about offline, but we'll finally get a chance to talk about online with him on the podcast in a few weeks. But we need to get to our current guest.
We do. And we do spend a lot of time talking to people about how the most popular online media channels happen, where those ideas come from, how you grow a thing, how you make it sustainable. What we don't talk a whole lot about is moving on from that. Tonight's guest is on a very unique and very short list of YouTube creators who successfully built and sold their entertainment business to a traditional media company. Jared Bauer co-founded Wisecrack, an educational channel with a decidedly fun and funny attitude. And it started with Thug Notes. Think Cliff's Notes or Spark Note for classic literature that blended hip-hop sensibilities with masterpiece theater. And then came 8-Bit Philosophy, which tackled Jean-Paul Sartre, Diogenes, and the ponderings of legendary thinkers through the visuals of NES games. Earthling Cinema reviewed movies through the intergalactic eyes of an alien, and many more formats followed as both YouTube and Wisecrack evolved. But in 2019, after 6 years of distilling culture and funneling it into imaginative entertainment, Blue Ant Media subsidiary Omnia Media acquired Wisecrack. Jared stuck around to help transition the company, and now he's starting over. So, Jared, you started on YouTube in its early days. What's different about reinventing yourself now?
Oh, man. Well, I almost consider myself to be almost in the mid days. But I guess, yeah, I mean, these days it definitely is early days. Well, I would say that during the time that we started, there was a very different idea of what the future would look like. And I think a lot of that was there was a certain bullishness in the market. One of the things that allowed our company to raise a round of funding was that There was like a Business Weekly front cover that had the Fine Brothers and Epic Mealtime and all of these like classic YouTube 1.0 celebrities. And this was also a time, I'm talking about like 2012, 2011, where the idea of like Roku's and getting YouTube content on a television was like a brand new thing. And so the idea that was kind of in everybody's mind was that, okay, this digital content is going to be the next stage in the advertising model, and that it will command similar revenues as traditional advertising. Because if you can watch it on a big screen, what's the difference, right? And so because of that, the effort was very much a kind of branded corporate effort, in that we wanted to create a brand that would live past myself, which would live past any of the individuals that were part of it. The idea was to create something that was lasting and that could travel across platforms and mediums. And I think that, and we can talk about kind of the more granularities of why that didn't happen. And all of these companies that were, traditional media companies that had digital arms, all of those closed down. Most digital first media companies that have usually sold for stock or just completely died. Basically, it didn't work out. And so what I would say is that the people that started in YouTube 1.0 that were doing very kind of cult of personality, authentic efforts that were much more focusing on those parasocial relationships, that was the right thing to do back then and remains so today, is what I would say.
I would love to get granular, because we haven't actually had a guest in 130 some episodes who can speak kind of the lingo on that. We have really just had cult of personality, as you put it, creators on the create unknown, because mostly, like you said, that's what has thrived. That remains kind of like what the whole platform is about. So it's fascinating to me to not let what you're talking about be forgotten or be lost, because, obviously I remember all of that stuff as well. I remember Maker Studios being purchased by Disney for $500 million with a B dollars. And then, whatever
and
the
by
heck
the way,
happened to that.
Oh, they're all kicking themselves. There's no way that was a profitable acquisition.
No. But there were a lot of those. There was a lot of money exchanging hands, and yeah, you're right. A lot of traditional media pouring money into what they thought would be the future, and that was a future that hasn't seemed to have arrived. So get more into it, because I'd love to hear more of what you have to say and your thoughts around that era, what people got right, what people got wrong, and kind of where we're at today.
So the answer to that question is actually quite simple, but also directly translates into my job today, because the reason why this didn't happen is also the industry that I now work in. So these days I work in video game marketing, but specifically a certain kind of marketing called user acquisition, which basically means funneling millions and millions and millions of dollars into platforms like Facebook and Google, as well as other ad networks, but mostly the marketing duopoly that is Facebook and Google. Now, the reason why you don't see even like PewDiePie, as rich as he is, if he were a traditional broadcaster, he'd be like 1,000 times as rich. And in my opinion, he probably deserves to be. Now, obviously, PewDiePie isn't wanting for anything. But what basically happened is that, long story short, all of the money just went directly to the platforms. It went directly to Facebook and Google, because I actually see the numbers every day at my current job, where let's say you do an influencer campaign. Let's say you're a brand like Dove soap and you've got $1 million to spend for marketing. Now, you can do the hard work yourself and, say, I'm going to, spend $500,000 on Vsauce 2, because it looks like his audience might be the kind of audience that likes our soap. And then I'm going to spend $100,000 here, and you can kind of do the legwork. But a lot of it is going to be based on what are basically just guesses on how much the product is going to resonate with those audiences. Not only that, but it's a lot harder case to make to your boss when you're just saying like, well, they have this demographic, such and such, I think it's going to work. contrary to that is if you just give the money directly to Facebook and Google, they have data that's so granular and sophisticated that they can just pinpoint people who are running out of soap and that are going to need to buy soap soon.
Right.
And so it's much easier to make a case, even if it's a product like Dove soap in which you can't actually track conversions. But most of the products that do advertise for YouTubers are a lot of e-commerce companies where you can track the conversions. So, for example, during my time at Wisecrack, I read probably 1,000 ads, and we were always measured by how many conversions we actually were able to achieve, i.e., how many people actually bought those products. And it became a very stressful thing because if we didn't have our fans actually buy the product, then they're not going to advertise with us again. We lose money. Yeah. I don't sleep, But anyway, at my current job, I see that giving the money to Facebook and Google, the return on investment for your ads is 10 to 15x what you would get from giving it to an influencer. And so it's basically just simple economics of what are you going to do? Of course, you're going to do whatever is going to give you more money back. And there's just a complete asymmetry of power and asymmetry in the ability to actually serve these ads to people who are more likely to buy. And then you can get into the whole tech ethics element of it, because it's not only do they find the right people to buy the product, but one could argue, as some people have in the tech ethics space, that they actually mold people to buy your product. So that's basically what happened, is that there's no reason to give money to influencers because you're just not going to make as much money back than if you just give it directly to Facebook and Google.
So anybody who's left essentially still giving money to influencers, whether it is like mobile apps, Raid Shadow Legends, the Dollar Shave Clubs of the world, essentially there's like a small minority perhaps of companies who do see a good return this way. But essentially what you're saying is all of the heavy hitters, and obviously I think we all have noticed this, people who watch YouTube, people who make YouTube, there are not a lot of gigantic heavy hitter companies supporting YouTubers. It is at this point, and has been for years really, like the Honeys of the world, and the same kind of few dozen like Blue Aprons or Purple Mattresses or whatever of the world, Express VPNs. It's not a whole lot of Coca-Colas and Starbucks and, BMWs right. and Heinekens.
So there's two answers to that. One is that, and I think tied into that question is like, what we're all asking ourselves is, well, then wait a second, how does traditional media get away with this? How is it that CNN or Fox News commands millions of dollars or at least six figures for an ad, but the person who bought that ad has no way to really prove if it actually converted into any purchases? Mm-hmm. Now, the answer to that is because a lot of boomers still watch television. And what that means is I think, well, I believe this, but I also think it's almost a certainty, is that the traditional marketing space is a house of cards that is about to collapse in the next 10 years when, more of the boomer generation, starts, well, not watching as much TV. Let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. And so all of these industries are basically propped up by personal relationships, by good old boys clubs, by just the tradition and the, I guess, really the habit of, signing checks to these networks and, just kind of saying that it's in the plan to not look at it as kind of an ROI thing. So that's one thing. And then even with some of these bigger YouTube companies or companies that still exist, it's all about who your sales rep is. It's all about the relationships that you have. So, your Blue Aprons and stuff like that, a lot of those are just a lot of those sponsorships for some of the bigger companies that still exist, like Group 9, like Rooster Teeth and stuff like that. A lot of that, similar to the cable networks and the traditional TV, is all based on just relationships among sales executives. But the other thing is that it still is a powerful thing. I don't want anyone to think that the influencer world is not valuable to marketers at all, because it is. The problem is it requires a little bit more effort in that really whenever you read an ad, it's kind of just cryptically saying like, hey, Blue Apron paid me for this, get the product. What is a real win for marketers when they do influencer campaigns is like, imagine if, Kevin, you were to say, hey, I'm sponsoring Raid Shadow Legends. Click here and you can actually play a character in Raid Shadow Legends that's modeled after me. That's something that is extremely powerful that you can't get by giving the money directly to the platforms. And it requires a little bit more work, but it can be very fruitful. And you see, even in the last year or so, some big Twitch streamers and some big influencers are getting their own characters in Fortnite and stuff like that. So there are opportunities. It's just not as quick and simple as Facebook and Google. And the other thing I'll say, and sorry, I feel like I'm talking a little bit too much. The other thing I'll say is that being an influencer is a good space to be in right now because the age of privacy is coming. You know, earlier last year, there was the whole thing called ATT, which make it so that basically now, if you're running these user acquisition efforts, you can't get any data from pretty much anything on any iPhone. All the data that's being used to inform these campaigns that spend millions and millions of dollars running ads are all on Android phones because of what Tim Cook did like 1 or 2 years ago. So this is only going to be happening more and more. And as people become, and as these platforms become less precise in targeting and crafting, you know, potential valuable users or valuable customers, people are going to come back to these influencers.
Mm-hmm.
When does it make sense for a company to partner with somebody making content? Because on the surface, companies are horrible at making stuff other than their product. You know, when they try to make any content that's at all relevant to their brand, usually nobody cares, you know, and even on the social media campaigns, I see more people making fun of brand Twitter than actually good tweets from brand Twitter. When can a company look at the prospect of working with somebody and say, you know, this really is going to add to what we do in a way that goes beyond the return that they're going to get from handing the money over to any of those companies to pepper it into stuff as they see fit?
I mean, honestly, I think the real answer to that is just, you know, how much money do they have to spend? If they have tons of money, like the company that I currently work for, they're going to try out influencer marketing just because they want to cover all their bases and they want to prove to investors or shareholders that they're trying everything and that they're covering all bases. But in a company that is a little bit more strapped for cash and is a little bit more in less of a growth phase and more of like, all right, we need an ROI positive phase, they're probably going to stop doing the influencer thing.
Mm-hmm. But what I'm hearing, though, and maybe you can tell me I'm wrong, is that it seems to lead me to believe that you think that kind of what failed almost in the market 10 years ago has an opportunity to succeed in the next 10 years.
I do think that, potentially. It depends on what happens with data privacy laws, if they continue to get, and, you know, there's always workarounds. You know, these tech companies are very good at finding loopholes and finding data in other ways. So it just depends on really the way that the influencer becomes more valuable or as valuable as I think it should be is just dependent on Facebook and Google's inability to get data that's as granular as they're getting right now, which even with what Tim Cook is doing, you know, there's still other ways that they can get it. So it's a kind of a bet on my part. I think that it's going to get more valuable. One thing we know is that people are not going to stop listening to influencers. People are not going to stop consuming content on phones or screens of some kind. So the influencer market will always be there, I guess. So that's why I still feel bullish about its viability as, you know, a source of revenue. What's not certain, though, is the future of privacy. And I guess that's really my point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So I still would like to circle back a little bit in the kind of early days of, like you said, you were able to take on investors and, you know, Epic Mealtime is on the cover of magazines and stuff like that. And also about how, you know, you mentioned PewDiePie. If he were a traditional broadcaster, he would have made a lot more money, despite the fact that there's this perception that he already, you know, is way overpaid. And that's really the only time you ever hear about YouTubers in the media is like, look at how much money this person's making. And it's like, okay, yeah, that is a lot. That is really a lot. But I mean, what are we comparing this to? Are we comparing this to like Jimmy Fallon's salary, or, whoever else
Yeah,
gets paid like
exactly.
$80 million?
Right. That's the big joke. Like the idea that even someone like Anderson Cooper is any more talented or works harder than PewDiePie. I'm sorry. It's a fantasy. At least PewDiePie writes his own content. Anderson Cooper just looks at a teleprompter and reads.
How much does Anderson Cooper get paid to read that teleprompter? Do you know? Is it a lot of money?
I mean,
I have no idea.
I'm guessing it's more than 20 million a year. That's probably the low end.
Right.
Jeez.
That's on the low end.
His salary is listed at 9, and there's no way I believe that. Let's see. Another one, CNBC says 12 million a year. I would have thought double that.
Jeez.
But that's just his salary from CNBC. He probably gets paid to speak. He's probably on the board of like 17 different companies that his aunt hooked him up with. I mean, he's got money coming in from a lot of places.
Yeah. So what do you think was the advertising illusion, basically the straw that broke the camel's back with all of those companies in the beginning, where it just wasn't able to drive or bring in enough revenue as they expected it to?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, that's Refinery 29, all of these brands, ESPN's digital effort, Stan Lee, not Marvel. Stan Lee had his own little mini digital brand that was even on the Disney lot for a while. It was very short-lived. Basically, yeah, I mean, just none of these companies could figure out how to make money, because there was also the illusion that, okay, well, a brand will pay more money for a brand like ESPN that gets 50,000 views than PewDiePie, who's just some kid in Sweden getting 50,000 views. But again, because this is all based on conversion, and there's actual data to point to actually say how much money we made on the ad, whereas in traditional media, that doesn't exist. You just buy the ad space, you hope it produces positive brand sentiment, you hope that somebody eventually goes out and buy the product, you kind of wipe your hands, you see how many people watched it, cool. If you like the guy you sold the ad to, you'll probably buy it again. But in this case, it's more than likely that more people will buy the product from a PewDiePie ad than from ESPN. So these ad buyers looked at this and said, wait a second, we have no reason to buy the ad from ESPN. This whole idea of positive brand sentiment really falls to the wayside, and nobody cares when there is raw data in front of you telling you how much money you made or lost. And so that's basically what happened, is that nobody wants to pay ESPN for something nebulous like brand sentiment. They want money back on their investment.
Right. And what you're saying, which makes perfect sense, is that whoever that brand is, say it's Charmin toilet paper, rather than dealing with establishing relationships with different influencers, Charmin toilet paper just says, hey, YouTube, here's our Brinks truck full of advertising money. You figure this out with your algorithms. And then what happens on the back end is that even though there is obviously a rev share for the creator, there's still, almost half of that they'll never see. And that basically just isn't enough money to sustainably grow a major media business. I mean, how many major media businesses really exist today on YouTube?
I mean, there's Barstool Sports, there is Donut Media, Rooster Teeth, but that doesn't really count anymore since they were acquired by AT&T, and now who knows. But I mean, yeah, I'm hard pressed to think of more than 5. And those examples, like Donut Media, like those guys are amazing.
Mm-hmm.
What they have accomplished is incredible. It's so hard to do what they've done.
Mm-hmm.
And even they, from what I know, they're the kind of business, and they got acquired recently, but even their business was something like, these are not real numbers, but it was like spend 10 million to make 10 million in $50. So, I mean, they were profitable and they were scaling, but, it wasn't like a super, super profitable thing.
Right. Yeah. I actually had the opportunity to do a collaboration with Donut Media. A few years ago, I was in a video about some Lexus race car thing. And It was incredible. I have nothing but nice things to say about all of those people that worked for Donut. It was like the most professional set that I've ever been on. I was like, holy cow, this is a real thing. This is not like doing a YouTube collab. This is like doing an actual, being on an actual set, essentially. It was incredible.
Did you throw up from that race? Like, didn't it?
I didn't throw
whip
up.
You around hard?
I did. I didn't literally throw up. Okay, I didn't actually nothing came out.
I can't remember.
No. But however, there is a caveat.
That's like Bill Clinton saying he didn't inhale.
Yes.
At what point do you begin vomiting when it actually comes out of your mouth?
It felt like it for a long time. It's the one and only time I never thought that I was car sick. I've never been seasick, air sick, car sick in my entire life. Never had motion sickness. Until that day, and I don't blame Donut. It's fine. But basically,
no, it's not a knock on you. I mean, you were going a million miles an hour and whipping around.
The problem was I was going a million miles an hour whipping around, trying to perform into a GoPro camera on the dashboard of this car. So I was like staring into this GoPro on the dashboard, trying to remember my lines as I am just like horrifically whipping around a racetrack. And if I were able to just like look at the road, I wouldn't have got sick. Yeah. But it was this weird combination of like not looking at the road and getting jostled around that, holy cow, was I freaking car sick and motion sick for like a couple hours after that. And I told them, after they wanted to do another take. And I was like, nope. It's like, I'm not going back. I literally can't. I cannot go back in that car. I'm not going back on the racetrack. I need to like lie down and I need to leave. But luckily, we got what we needed to get. But the point of the story is they were amazing to work with. And I'm not surprised that they're, one of the few successful things, successful media companies that were really kind of like YouTube born. But I'm also not surprised to hear, like you said, that it's not like they were, Scrooge McDuck vaulting in their profits. It was really just kind of like a break even thing. And then eventually, they were acquired. And I'm sure whoever the founders were, that was their payday, which isn't weird. A ton of businesses, do work that way. But it just kind of goes to show that even with all their, merchandise sales and whatever other kind of, tributary income that they had, at the end of the day, like those shoots on race car tracks with a whole bunch of crew, kind of expensive. They kind of cost a lot of money to make those videos. You have to pay all those people,
Totally. But I mean, I think that the whole business was, including up to the acquisition, was probably very successful. It was by design. A lot of times companies that are posturing for an acquisition, it's basically to look, they just want to get as much revenue as possible. So even if they could spend $5 million to make $10 million and have $5 million profit, it's better for an acquisition for them to spend as much as they can to break even, if that makes sense. So it wasn't. So I mean, they could have been a profitable thing, but that's just not what I would imagine. This is just me guessing what the investors would have preferred.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Put down your can of Hyper Hydro Monster and your Crimson Berry White Claw. It's time to rethink the beverages in your life. We drink a tremendous amount of tea, working on videos, recording the podcast, but we don't drink normie NPC tea. We drink cultured and refined anime tea from the Dragon's Treasure. They've got a gunpowder green tea called Space Cowboy. If you've listened to this podcast before, you know why Kevin likes it. And I used to chew gunpowder green tea leaves when I played baseball in the 90s. I love the stuff. Dragonwell Z, Samurai Chai Plu, black teas, herbals. The Dragon's Treasure describes itself as a haven for anime and tea lovers for a reason. They've even got a tea called Uwu. It's got apple bits and cocoa nibs. It's crazy. I bought the 60 tea sampler pack as soon as I could. I wanted to try everything. It's that good. And when you order from the Dragon's Treasure using the code CREATE, you'll get 10% off your order. That's 10% off using the code CREATE at thedragonstreasure.com. The link's in the description. Look, find me another place that sells Russian caravan tea with a name like, "And then everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked." You can't. thedragonstreasure.com, 10% off when you enter the code CREATE at checkout. The link's in the description below. Get brewing, Space Cowboys.
So let's get back to Wisecrack then. So, you built up this brand that, could live on beyond you. You know how you had all of these other actors on Wisecrack and, different people that you brought in, different shows, different formats. What was that process like? And when did you decide it was time to move on from that?
Well, the process was, it was a mad dash 24/7. It was a very unhealthy scenario. I basically burned out in like 2018 and then, kept going for like another year and a half. And then we, managed to, get a safe landing selling the company. And then honestly, at that point, I really thought that I would be building this company for the rest of my life. And then at some point, just something soured. And my mental health just took a complete collapse, because I was still burned out. And after the acquisition, there was only more content to make. We became more reliant on advertising. For every step forward, we would take 4 steps back. I was running out of ideas. Pretty much every single concept, everything I had learned, I had said I could no longer learn fast enough. I was just totally burnt out. It was a very, very high stakes, stressful situation that lasted for 8 years. And my body and my mind were just completely worn out. Mm-hmm. And there was no other option for me than to just step away. And I just had to really have a clean break. And even today, I'm starting again with making content, but it's very low effort in the sense that, it's just me talking to a camera. And only recently have I been able to really start writing again, because I wrote so much over the last 8 years. I wrote, 114 episodes of Thug Notes, the Thug Notes book, like 30 episodes of 8-Bit Philosophy. I edited, 600 scripts that were, and everything that was made for Wisecrack was, very meticulously researched and written. So I was just so burnt out. And only now, after having been away from it for almost 2 years, am I even able to start writing again. Mm-hmm. So, I left for health reasons. And I know a lot of this podcast is about like, how do you just keep going? And, I think that in a lot of ways, my situation was unique, because I've even talked to you, Kevin, at times where you were like, taking a break from the channel, we're going to focus on writing my book. That's just never an option that we had, because it was a business. We had payroll, stuff like that. Pretty much every time that things were going bad and I felt discouraged, unfortunately, that meant we had to work harder, So it was a messy, horrible situation.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, knowing what you know now and having been through all of that, do you think there would have been a way to do it differently to not grind down like that? Because as you were talking about this, I was thinking about conversations that Kevin and I have had about the NFL, about football, and how certain positions people physically burn out, like running backs. Kevin, what is the average career? Like 3 years?
I think, the average NFL career, I believe, is only 3 years. Yeah. And I don't know about running backs specifically, but man, it seems like most running backs have like maybe 2 good seasons in them for the most part. And then they're on the scrap heap.
But what's the alternative? You play it safely and extend a career that's bad. Like if you're a running back, you've got to do the peak performance while you can. But the reality is that it just grinds you down. And Jared, you were describing a scenario in which you really had to go through that gauntlet of stuff. It sounded that way, like there's almost no alternative to it. Do you think that's reality? That there's almost a finite amount of creative stress that somebody can undergo, or is it possible to extend that? And even if you could, would you have wanted to?
Well, yeah, I do think. And then, so this is an anecdotal thing that I've heard through the grapevine, but have you guys ever interviewed Freddie W on this podcast?
No. I've only spoken with him like once. Yeah, I don't really know him.
So again, I've never met him, but I was at one point close-ish to a guy who worked. So Freddie W had a very similar story to where, Rocket Jump became huge on YouTube, and then he got this Hulu deal that Rocket Jump was going to have its own Hulu show. And then based off of that, he also got a bunch of investment. But that whole thing burned to the ground based on Freddie's Burnout. And, now I think he's mostly podcasting. I don't really know, but I just know that basically the guy that I talked to was once a part of his company. And, he told me that, basically, if Freddie is any indication, people are like batteries. Once you deplete that creative juice, like it takes a very long time to get it back. And so it wasn't just creative depletion for me. I mean, there was a lot of kind of other emotional, ideological, political sometimes issues that surrounded my exhaustion and it not being fun anymore. And so I would say that, and if I had a chance to do it again, I wouldn't have raised money from investors and wouldn't have built the business on a vision, obviously, to simplify it, I wouldn't have invested in a stock that wasn't going to go up, or I wouldn't have invested in a business model that wasn't going to go up and to the right. I probably would have tried to bootstrap it somehow, or just take out like personal loans or something like that to get it to where it needs to be before it could float on its own. And then I would be a little less, there would just be less pressure.
Mm-hmm. So you think that's more or less kind of where most creators are finding success today then and that for this foreseeable future seems to be the way to go in your estimation?
In my estimation, I really do think that first of all, one of the things that when I started Wisecrack, I was very averse to the idea of these these parasocial relationships. I thought it was a very alienating thing. I thought it was a very hollow kind of relationship. I was very critical of it. And I was also a film school kid, so I really wanted it to be like more traditional entertainment. But I've really come to do a complete 180 on that and really come to embrace the idea of the parasocial relationship as, a meaningful thing that it could potentially be. And that this idea of kind of, relationships to where there is more distance is just a feature of our new digital reality. And so I think that the right thing to do, or the smart thing to do as a creator, is to be authentic. As was said earlier, brand Twitter is a cringe fest. You pretty much cannot you cannot resonate on the internet as a brand, or at least it's very difficult. I mean, again, there are the exceptions like Donut Media, like Barstool Sports, but it's very difficult. And then just be shamelessly yourself. I think that what people are starving for, and I think one of the biggest opportunity for content is authenticity, because it's funny, like the internet is simultaneously the thing that makes it so hard to find authenticity today, because it also kind of functions as this panopticon where everything you say is always being recorded, and anything that you say can be broadcasted. And, so people are like disciplining themselves to act certain ways and to wear certain fashionable opinions that are least likely to offend. But at the same time, it also creates a greater demand to kind of break that down, to kind of cathartically undermine it. And so I think that you just got to be brave on the internet. You got to be authentic on the internet. And you got to treat your audience, no matter if it's 10 people, no matter if it's 10 million people, treat them like people, not like numbers, not like data.
Mm-hmm.
We want to help you make something and mean something. And we say that phrase all the time because when you're making something and you know it means something, even if it's just to you, that's when you feel pretty good about what you're creating. The support for the Create Unknown in recent weeks has been incredible. Animators, artists, musicians, YouTubers, aspiring filmmakers, comedians, it is crazy how talented everybody in this community is. Consider joining the Create Unknown Patreon. Every dollar that comes through goes straight into the podcast and its community. That means more highlights videos. It means a big Minecraft project that's on the way. And eventually we'd like to manufacture custom piss bottles so you never have to leave your battle station. And being a patron unlocks participation in all all of our live recordings. You've seen the roster of guests we've had. Having access to their minds is a unique opportunity. You can go to patreon.com/thecreateunknown or click the link that's in the description. Every little bit helps, and your support means absolutely everything to us. Patreon.com/thecreateunknown, links in the description. We appreciate you, Space Cowboys. Do you think there's an appeal to really the opposite of a parasocial relationship? Because as we're talking about how important that is with the content, I think back to last week, I was reading about traditional publishing. People are reading more books now compared to 2018, 2017. A big part of that is COVID-related lifestyle patterns changing and more people are reading. But reading is like the ultimate one-way piece of media. You know, you're never giving anything back or feeling like it's there, but at the same time you identify with characters and you might really like a writer, but it's all coming in one way. Then you get YouTube, where this, the cults of personality are created and kind of fomented. People seem to really like both things, where they can safely consume a thing and not have this connection to it at all, just whatever is in their head when they consume it, versus that parasocial element that's a facet of YouTube and Twitter and Instagram and all of that. Is there a place for having less of a relationship, is my question.
I think I guess it depends on the platform. Like, in a sense, I really like the way that you broke that down regarding books. And I think that YouTube is more book-like, whereas something like Twitch is kind of, there's a little bit more reciprocity in the relationship. And so, I think that, to answer your question, yes. Ultimately, the medium is the message. And I think that, even if you're going to have to the relationship is always going to be different on different platforms.
I just wrote down YouTube is books because that's blowing my mind.
Right?
I think YouTube is books. That's an amazing revelation. Because there's this whole thing about TikTok and shorts, and there's this cognitive war that's going on essentially amongst some creators about how short content and TikTok is lesser and is terrible, whatever, however you want to describe it. It's bad. That's bad. YouTube good. And I wonder if on some level of analysis, there is kind of this like books versus TV war that used to happen, where like people who were very well read scoff their nose at the idiot box, which was television, right? I don't know if any of this is making sense because it's just kind of like sparking in my brain, but I can see a shift sort of in attitudes towards the way people are thinking now of YouTube as this kind of passive experience where you do really have to, it's really like an active experience, because you have to you have to open the app, then you have to scroll through a bunch of thumbnails, and you have to decide which one you want to watch. And then, if you don't have YouTube Premium, you got to sit through the ad and then skip it. It's kind of a lot of work in the way that like reading a book is kind of a lot of work, as opposed to something like TikTok, which is no work. You just open the app and it is just like dangling the carrot right in front of your nose constantly. And if you're not entertained within the first 2 seconds, you just swipe away and get the next carrot. But
that's like channel surfing, right?
Yeah, right.
Like a television, yeah.
It is like TV. That's the analogy here. Is any of that resonating?
No, that resonates with me. And you said that it's I actually would love to hear from you. You said that people back in the day thought, oh, the idiot box, television makes you dumb or whatever. When you said that, were you like, oh, they were wrong? Or what do you think about that general attitude that people had back then about like the way that television would, pervert or distort people's cognitive development?
I don't know. I don't know that I have like a really well thought through opinion on that. I was definitely stating it as just an attitude that was pervasive at that time. And I still think probably to some degree exists. But I remember as a kid, that was a lot more pervasive than it is now, where as a kid, there was this kind of like clear attitude towards TV as being the idiot box, couch potato, that sort of thing. You're kind of like an idiot. You're like a dumb person for sitting there watching TV all day, as opposed to, someone who spends their time reading. That's what like an intellectual does. And there was like a clear delineation between those two types of peoples, like the readers and kind of the watchers. And I sniff the same like wafting essence of attitudes about this brand new kind of like YouTube versus TikTok thing, where it's almost identical conceptually to me. I don't know if television is the idiot box. I certainly think that there have been great TV shows that have, enriched people's lives and the culture. And there's been, probably way more TV shows that really are just crap. Pablum. I don't know what you would call it, but yeah, I don't know. These are new thoughts in my smooth brain, so I'm not really sure.
No,
where I'm going
really,
with it.
It is funny to think that analogy. YouTube is to books as, or no, YouTube is to shorts as books is. Wait, no, TikTok. TikTok.
I think you had
Hold
it.
on. It's okay. Yeah. So YouTube is to books as television is to TikTok. There we go.
Mm-hmm.
YouTube is to books as television is to TikTok.
No,
books are to YouTube.
Books are to YouTube as
right.
Yes.
Yeah, something like that.
As television is to TikTok.
Right. Exactly. No, I definitely think there's something there. I agree. Because it's really impossible to make. I mean, you can't form an argument in a TikTok or a short. You can't teach a lesson. You can do that on YouTube.
Why can't you do that? Why isn't it possible to do something serious and cogent in 60 seconds? Why do you need 4 minutes? And if you can't do it in 60, what's the minimum that you do need?
Well, if it's for the same reason.
This goes into questions that people have asked that we'll get to in a little bit about, you have more experience in like the video essay. Pretty much anybody we've talked to, you get how it works. So it's a real question. What are the limits of short format stuff?
There are some things that you can do in short format. As a matter of fact, if I was still working at Wisecrack, I would be embracing shorts hand over fist, because so often where their ideas on movies or television shows that we would cover and that were very popular, and we'd say like, oh man, is there anything we can do on The Mandalorian? Oh no, we can say one sentence, but really the whole idea can be composed into one sentence. There's really no reason. And so like you can do stuff like that, but it's the same reason that, a book can't, let's say, you can't have a philosophy book in a tweet. Because it requires development. It requires introducing an idea, building off of that idea until you can understand the next idea, and then building that idea, developing that idea until you introduce the third idea, and then those ideas collide and it creates a fourth idea. It requires development, collision of ideas, the birth of new ideas through the development of the previous ideas. You can't just kind of spit it all out at somebody in 30 seconds, or else it's not going to make sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I embrace both as well. I'm a big fan. I'm not one of the haters of shorts or TikTok. I think that for the most part, like if anybody can't tell from this podcast, like I'm a really big fan of when people make things. Like really big fan of that. I've always enjoyed that, whether it's art or music or video, or whatever it is. Like I love seeing people's arts and creations. And I think that the democratization of TikTok is just as revolutionary as it was when YouTube came onto the scene. Because when YouTube came onto the scene, a lot of people don't remember this, but it was really hard actually, and kind of expensive to get videos on YouTube. You need a whole bunch of equipment and like a pretty good computer that at that time, had to slowly edit and export videos. It really was kind of like the Stone Age of that, as opposed to today with TikTok and Instagram, whatever. Gosh, everybody has a phone. The phone has a camera. You record the thing on your phone and you upload it in 3 seconds and you're done. And it can get 11 million views. Like that is an absolutely crazy thing. And as much as I do obviously still enjoy a lot of YouTube videos and YouTube creators and the long form stuff, I would say almost 10 times out of 10, if I'm going to show my wife something, it's a TikTok. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Oh yeah, for sure.
if you're going to share something with somebody else, it's going to be this like really funny, stupid, weird thing that's 47 seconds long. It's not going to be a 33-minute diagnosis of Dark Souls 2. Like, who am I sharing that with? It's like a very kind of
totally.
me enterprise piece of content.
And it's also funny for us to think, like, when I got started on YouTube, and probably you too, Kevin, this was a time when people thought about YouTube, they were just like, oh, that's just cat videos. And here we are now defending the integrity of YouTube as like, oh, that's the intellectual platform, whereas TikTok is the equivalent of cat videos today.
Right.
But I agree with you. And it is also interesting that back when we started, one of the big beacons of success was BuzzFeed, and their whole model was based on, quote, shareable content. But that's when things go viral on YouTube, or when people make significant progress on YouTube, it's not really about shareability anymore. Those days are kind of done. It's all about the algorithm, more than it ever has been. And I think that another large reason of that is because things that are, like long form video content just isn't really shared. There's not really a situation where people are like, oh, I just watched this guy play Dark Souls for an hour. I think the people on my Facebook feed would really enjoy that. No, it's going to be a 40-second TikTok or even shorter that's really snappy and funny.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still stuck on the idea that the really short stuff can only communicate a limited amount of things, because I think about some of the most important and famous things it could easily fit in a tweet, that are things that are really meaningful, like something like taking Julius Caesar's Veni Vidi Vici. That says so much in three. Even the three words themselves are very, very short. It's got raw ambition, it's got decisiveness and confidence, and it's got the action there. That was a big deal. Descartes. Oh, Kevin and I have a mutual friend whose last name is Descartes. But Descartes saying, "I think, therefore I am." That's a foundational element
but you
of Western
can't.
philosophy.
But I mean, breaking down the cogito, like, I mean, you can tweet, I think, therefore I am, but what does that even mean? Like, what does that mean? Like, in terms of like, yeah, I can tweet, I think, therefore I am, but can someone then explain to me why that is a milestone of modern thought? No, that requires a YouTube video or a longer piece.
Okay, but where does that end? Does it require, can you do it justice in a 20-minute video? Do you need 20 weeks in a semester in college, or 20 years to think about it? There's a bound on the other end as well, where at a certain point, how do you decide that you've put sufficient effort into to breaking the thing down?
Of course. I mean, and when we start talking about philosophers, there are some Descartes scholars and Nietzsche scholars who literally study them their entire life and still will attest to the fact that they know nothing about them. So, of course, there's a limit on the other end. But at the same time, I think that in this age of information, of quickly digestible information, something that we're always fighting for, and we ought to continue fight for, is nuance. And yes, there's different levels of nuance. Obviously, I'm not suggesting that everybody that engages with Descartes have the level of nuance that a Descartes PhD person has. But I do think that, there should be, somewhere on that spectrum to where they are actually able to talk about the relevance of cogito ergo sum, talk about at least what it means, and, how it made an impact on philosophy and how philosophy was different before and after. I mean, like, this is stuff that, if we're talking about, mediums of information, this is stuff that you might be able to find on a Wikipedia article, for example. But I guess you can't get the knowledge you can from a Wikipedia article in a tweet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like just kind of like levels of storytelling to me. It's like you could tell a short story, you could tell a long story. You have novellas, you have novels. They serve different purposes, and they're all good. I guess that's kind of my feeling on the whole thing. It's like it's all good, and you have different reasons, to sample each. It's funny that you talk about kind of summarizing things when that's literally what you started with Thug Notes, which was creating a Spark
Right.
Notes video version of a book and saying, here's, To Kill a Mockingbird explained in this very particular style in a few minutes. So,
And I think what Tabor's getting at that I really agree with is that whenever a new medium is introduced, there's a new way to engage with information. And I think that, like there is a Wikipedia version of Descartes that we can now consume. There's a YouTube version of Descartes that we consume. There's a TikTok version of Descartes. There's a Twitter version. I'm not saying that Descartes on these mediums will be identical or uniform, but in a sense, these mediums just through whether it's just convenience, will give a new accessibility to these ideas and hopefully not pervert them or flatten them in ways that are too egregious, but hopefully in a way that's very exciting and more inviting, which again, like Wisecrack in a sense was or is that in a nutshell. It's like, how can we take these, how can digital media, YouTube, enable us to bring kind of critical thinking, academic ideas that were usually relegated to the ivory tower of academia and make it relevant to people who are interested in books or interested in movies or interested in music and stuff like that. So I think, yeah, these mediums create whole new lives and whole new identities for these ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Charles Kahn asked a question about that's relevant to what you're just saying about a new medium popping up and then we engage with it in a different way. He wanted to know what you thought of memes as ads, as content, as channels for sales. How, you talked about business things earlier and companies using this content to fulfill their missions. But he said positive memes can get, can push a product through and negative ones can kind of bury it. That's in terms of visual memes and how often we see memes. That's a relatively new concept. How does that fit into all of this?
Okay, so when we're talking about memes, I mean, memes are, we're talking about just like visual, like JPEG memes, right? Because the idea of memes as just a symbolic cultural signifier that's passed down through the development of language is not new. I mean, that's basically like the key to our cognitive development over the ages. But if we're talking about just like JPEGs, I'm sorry, can you restate or can you say the question again?
How memes as a medium fit in really to the content landscape. I know it's vague, but if we're to, like people see memes on Twitter, not so much proverbs about hard work that have been passed down for generations. Instead, it's like, I think the example that Charles used in the episode chat was about The Last of Us, Last of Us 2 getting memed hard, and helping to determine how people thought about that game.
Yeah, I think that because the internet has allowed for us to communicate at a faster speed, exponentially faster speed than we ever have. Whether memes, and when I say memes, I don't mean necessarily just JPEGs or necessarily like GIFs or something, but just the idea that we can create an idea or a sentiment about something or a product that is like kind of a unique meaning. These things are able to be created much quicker. So what do I mean by that? Like if you take like a literal meme, like y'all remember the Harlem Shake? Remember that?
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So the Harlem Shake is something that's very difficult to explain to someone in a sentence. Like, what is the Harlem Shake? I guess the best way you can describe it is like, okay, well, it's like a dance ritual in which people do this, and it's to this one like Bauer song. But anyway, the point is that the Harlem Shake, it represents like a cultural code that we all understand. And, even though the meaning is a little bit hard to actually describe or define in any kind of dictionary sense. And so when you take something like The Last of Us 2 through these JPEGs and these memes and stuff like that and these GIFs, we're able to produce all of these meanings about the way that the game has been received, about people's opinion on the games, about like very certain critiques of the game, whether it's, that whether the meme is reflecting on the fact that like maybe there was an overemphasis on diversity, or maybe that it was just so dark, or that it was, had like really amazing gameplay or something like that. Memes on the internet, basically my point is that language is able to evolve and new meanings are able to be birthed at such a quick pace that these memes are really just creating new cultural codes for us to interact with and to share with each other. And so like basically just new meanings that are very specific to cultural parts of the internet are just being created at breakneck speed. Now, in terms of marketing, I think that a brand that someone brought up earlier, Raid Shadow Legends, is a super interesting one. I think that it was a mistake that Raid Shadow Legends ended up becoming this meme for like, something that's just that people like pimp way too much. But I think that it's become a huge asset for that company because it's become a household name. And so in a sense, memes are very much integral to the marketing landscape. And I think things like that can only really happen accidentally. Like another one is the shake weight. Like that could never have been like, willed by a marketing team. But obviously every marketing team wants to land on that, where like their product has a unique cultural meaning that is, developed organically, but it's impossible to create organically. Sorry if that was a long-winded answer. I hope there was something cogent in there.
There's a lot that was cogent in there. And the problem with your answers is that they make me think of like 10 other avenues that we could go down. They're the opposite of dead-end answers. But I wanted to jump into a question from Dan the Latch, because he asked about video essays in a way that that really undergirds a whole lot of what we've talked about. He said he pointed out that pop culture videos, video essays, they're a dime a dozen now. The analytical stuff is really popular. Educational stuff is too. How can a new creator or a video writer approach those things in a unique way? And that's what I was thinking when you were talking about philosophy stuff. It's like if somebody has an idea to make a video, and they want to be unique and interesting, probably the worst thing you can do is be like, oh, I'll take a topic that humanity has spent 500 years discussing. That's really the toughest nut to crack. So how can you take something that's really old and been done before, or something like a new movie, and come up with a truly original contribution to the discourse?
It's really hard. I'm not even sure if I'm going to have a great answer for this. Two things I'll say is that you'll notice on my new channel, two things. One thing I'm not doing is I'm not using footage. And although there's kind of a double reason for this, one is that, well, it's just more work to use footage. But another reason is that I'm not dealing with that YouTube claiming system anymore. But the secret third reason is that obviously your insights and your perspective is going to kind of make or break the uniqueness of your video. But one thing that nobody can ever replicate is just your face, your personality, your tone. And so don't shy away from using your face. I don't really think that footage on screen is really that important, even though most video essay channels, one of the most successful video essay channels these days, the Critical Drinker, I mean, most of it is just, it's just random footage most of the time, seemingly generated automatically by an algorithm. I don't think that's actually how he does it. But my point is that it's not really that important. I mean, yeah, if you're talking about a certain shot or a certain scene, then yeah, using the footage is important. But I would say that, using your face, although maybe counterintuitive, is potentially powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it goes back to what you were saying earlier about the authenticity, the relationship aspect of YouTube, and really that has really kind of, there's been this arc almost in the last 15 years or so of YouTube, starting there, going a different place, and then kind of returning there. I have a couple more questions before we let you go. The first one is actually from one of them's mine and one of them's from one of our patrons. So German wants to know, what you think of Wisecrack these days. Do you watch the videos? Do you think about it at all? Is it like an awkward thing where you're like running into an ex-girlfriend at the supermarket and you just kind of look the other way? Like what does it feel like? What
when you just asked him, I thought, God, I wonder what Steve Perry thinks of Journey right now.
Wait a second.
That's where your head went? Steve,
who came up with the girlfriend metaphor? Was it you, Kevin, or was it the patron?
That was me on the spot. Yeah,
that's exactly the one I used. That's exactly the one I use.
Really?
Yeah, it is. That it's just kind of like, I mean, well, it was for a while. Now I check in on. There was like a year where I couldn't even look at it, and it wasn't like because like the content was disappointing or anything. It was just because I just couldn't, it was just too personal. It was like, I don't know, it had nothing to do with like, I didn't even know how it was doing or what the content was like. These days, I do watch the content a little bit. I mean, basically, I know the format so well that I can pretty much just like press play and then like fast forward and kind of understand like, okay, this is the angle they're going for. Or like, all right, this is what they're doing. Most of the writers that I worked with are not working there anymore. There's like 3 people who were there who like have a heavy hand in actually crafting the content that are still working there. So usually I'll just like kind of click on a video, see who wrote it. If it's someone I don't know, I'm like a little less curious. If it's someone I do know, I'm just kind of curious to see like, oh, like how did they approach this and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, I was very, I ran the content team a very specific way. And I really just don't know how things are done these days. So, but yeah, it is kind of like an ex-girlfriend a little bit, but I guess I'll say that if Wisecrack does really, really well, then that's great because I accomplished my core mission was to create something that lived beyond me. If it doesn't do well, then at least I can claim, well, it's because I'm not there. So I win either way.
Yeah, it's a good attitude to have. Well, enough of the ex-girlfriend. I wanted to end on talking about your new girlfriend or girlfriends. I don't know if you're in like a creative polyamorous relationship with several projects or what, but just tell us about, all the things that you're doing. You mentioned before we started recording that you're like Twitch playing Elden Ring. Fill us in on where people can find you these days and support you.
Yeah, you can. So I've got a new YouTube channel. It's just my name, Jared Bauer. First name Jared, Jared. Last name Bauer, Bauer. I'm still doing a lot. So much of my previous efforts were, just built on what I thought was interesting and my identity. And so you'll find a lot of very similar stuff on this new channel. So I'm still talking a lot about movies. I did kind of a philosophical breakdown of the Robert Pattinson Batman movie. But I'm also just, liberated a little bit more in that, like, I'm no longer creating a brand that has to be like sponsorship safe. So, I'm talking about things that I find important, whether they be controversial or not. So, for example, I did a video on Slapgate recently. I'm doing like some book reviews. There's like this kind of emerging political philosophical movement here in the Nordics called political metamodernism that I've gotten very into, and I've been talking about that on my channel. And then on Twitch, I'm really very excited to be engaging with a community playing video games, which is something I've always done, and just being able to be my authentic self. No heavy scripting, no like curated personality, no kayfabe, no acting, just like being a person. And it's been really rewarding. And then I'm thinking about kind of Kevin, I know he's been writing a book for a while. I kind of want to maybe try my hand at that, but mine would definitely be nonfiction. But ultimately, I'm working now in the video game industry, and it's an interesting career. And more than anything, I'm just so happy to not have to be relying on content to make a living, because it was just so stressful for a while. So it's nice as like a hobby right now. And I think that honestly, the content is better now, maybe not from a production standpoint, but from a writing standpoint, now that it's not like, a gun to my head while I make it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that sounds like a healthy approach. I mean, that's certainly why most creative people started making things, was not to be under the forceful thumb of some sort of overbearing overlord. So I'm glad, that you have liberated yourself in such a way, and, looking forward to the stuff that you create. I hope that everybody goes and checks out, Jared's new channel, watch him die over and over again in Elden Ring, like all of us do. And
appreciate it. Oh, by the way,
if I put all the links in the description.
My Twitch name is Kalsaricanet87, and just I live in Finland now. Kalsaricanet is a word in Finnish that means getting drunk in your underwear with no aspirations to leave the house, which is like I'm trying to I'm trying to like make that word adopted in English, like the word Schadenfreude. You can't really translate that in English. You just have to use the German word. So Kalsaricanet is the one word from the Finnish language I'm trying to import into America.
That's what Eggy described a few times, isn't it? Like, who knew that there was a specific word for what he was trying to express?
I know. We have to tell Eggy that word. Can you say it again?
Yeah.
It's Kalsaricanet.
Kalsaricanet. All right. Kalsaricanet.
Perfect.
Kalsaricanet. You heard it here, folks. Kalsaricanet. Just embed it in your lexicon, because we're going to make that a thing. Kalsaricanet. All right, Jared, we're going to let you go. You're such a thoughtful person. It was awesome to have you on the podcast. This was a long time coming.
Can I ask one last thing? Can you give a shout out to a friend of mine in Brazil? He's such a fan.
Absolutely.
His name is Henrique Pereira from Tajambu, Brazil.
All right. Shout out to Henrique Pereira in Brazil. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Thanks to all of our patrons for hanging out with us. Again, we're here every Tuesday. So if you want to hang out with us, just join the Discord. If you want to support the show, join the Patreon, patreon.com/thecreateunknown. We'll be back next Tuesday with Barely Sociable. That will be a very, very good one. Until then, see you, Space Cowboys.
Thanks for listening to The Create Unknown. We make this show with the support of our patrons. 100% goes directly to keeping episodes going every week, and we've been shocked by all the new support this year. The world's ending and I'm late for work. Gib Tom, Sid Poke, Demetrius, Atrocious Guff. You guys really do make this show happen. Thank you to the Tots and Dumpster crew, old and new, who save tiny little lives every month. And thank you to our grizzled, battle-hardened child infantry. Jen Mefasanti, Kevin Menard, Mikhail Steinke, Risebread, Sean Malone, Triple Question Mark, Ryan, Kamikaze, Maria, Marco Sheep, Tom Videogre, Jelksies, and Dan the Latch. And a tremendous shout out to our elite baby gang commanders, Linus and Trevstead, Boromir, Bot Dogs, Chinchilla, Isaac, Conrad, James, Andrew, Jeff Davis, Patrick Pister, Baseweight, Monahim, Dojangles, and Zero. You really are the elite. Thank you as well to our indentured servants, producer-editor Ben Webster, Discord savior Latterman, and producer emeritus Dan Yoshua. And thanks to Baseweight for the use of Created in the Unknown for the opening theme, and to Electro Voice for giving us mics to sound good on top of it. The Create Unknown is an Unknown Media production in partnership with Studio 71.